Hey guys! How are you? Hope you are doing great, and yeah, I have a great story for you guys today. We will see how a person got reincarnated in Attack on Titan world. With Chakra and Mangekyo Sharingan and Susanoo in his arsenal, how he will change the world of Attack on Titan. Chapter 21, Climbing Training. Early the next day, the soldiers of the training corps gathered under a 100-meter high cliff. According to the words of the instructors, climbing training will be conducted at this place. Therefore, the climbing days will suspend physical training, and although it may seem easy, climbing cliffs is a physical and necessary activity for soldiers. Being afraid of heights is not an option, nor is not knowing how to climb. The familiar instructor's bald head appeared in time. Instructor Keith walked with a dozen instructors in front of the crowd. He looked at the loose positions of some and other apathetic trained soldiers. Instructor Keith flashed a smile and said, "At ease." All the soldiers froze when they heard that. Takashi on his side felt a little numbness in his back. Every time Keith Shades showed such a fatherly smile, he had no good intentions on his hands. Instructor Keith sneered, "Hey, look at your own pitiful appearance. You've only had a few days off, but look at the look on your face and your own confidence. Fear not, as a special thing to increase your strength and safety there will be surprises during practice. All this guarantees that your strength will increase." Whoosh! What is this? A sudden increase in power. Takashi looked at Keith with a grim expression. Under the instructions, everyone immediately lined up under the cliff. If Instructor Keith says there will be surprises during the test, they definitely shouldn't be in the last places. This feels really bad. Should we kill ourselves to forget this feeling? Damn it, yes, there are surprises. There should be surprises for everyone. Many people whispered, but no one dared to speak out loud. Instructor Keith didn't say much and started directly. "Everyone get ready to start with the climb. The rope next to you is the support you will have along the way, but I recommend that you don't rely too much on the rope if you don't want to fail this test." This test was a simulation of what could happen if on a mission the soldier ran out of compressed gas in his equipment. Being in a high place was not at all easy to create a chance of survival. So this training at least offers to increase the skills of each of the soldiers to react in that kind of situation. Precautions have been put in place. Start now. After Instructor Keith said that, all the soldiers in the training corps tied the rope around their waists and began to climb the cliff. Many people were nervous. Takashi looked up at the cliff at least 100 meters high, which had a 65 to 70-degree incline, and became nervous. Will he die in this training, or will he reveal his Susanoo to survive? What an embarrassing moment it would be. He can't make mistakes. The soldiers of the training corps began to climb the cliff with the three-dimensional maneuvering equipment, but the gas cylinder of all the equipment had very little and it was impossible to use it. The mere presence of the equipment was to appear more realistic simulation of soldiers. As for the rope, that only a form of support that could be had if the equipment was made use of. Physical strength and endurance are the important issues in this test. The instructors use the three-dimensional maneuvering equipment to supervise the soldiers. They usually stay close to the soldiers and from one moment to another, they move the rope so that the soldier loses his balance. If the people hanging on the rope don't react in time and don't stabilize themselves, once they slip and fall, even if they don't die, they will suffer serious injuries and most likely can't climb anymore. Although they complained internally, the soldiers began to climb the cliff. After climbing 20 meters high, the instructors took action and flew above the soldiers. With a smooth movement of his hand, a knife gleamed in the sunlight. "Get ready, I'm going to cut the rope." Boom! Without hesitation, an instructor cut Nelson's rope and the rope snapped, causing his body to tense up and react quickly, grabbing the lump of rocks on the cliff with both hands. Shit, wasn't the rope supposed to be cut after a while of training? Gah. Nelson's body slid down the stones, but finally steadied itself. Seeing this, Nelson let out a sigh of relief, wiped the sweat from his forehead with his elbow and secretly said that it was dangerous if he slipped now. In fact, Nelson was lucky, not all instructors were as straightforward as this one, and cut when they said they would. Some instructors are very treacherous, like Instructor Keith, the bald Instructor Keith. Instructor Keith was using the three-dimensional maneuvering equipment and was hanging not far above Aaron's head. He held a knife with a cold light and was gently brushing Aaron's rope. Aaron raised his head and looked at Instructor Keith, climbing slowly, always paying attention to Instructor Keith's movements and the fixed grip point to rocks to be prepared. Instructor Keith's knife swung on Aaron's thick rope for a long time, but did not cut it. Aaron was so nervous that he was sweating profusely. Finally, Instructor Keith suddenly raised his knife and cut the rope. Aaron reacted instantly, leaned against the cliff, grabbed the stones with his hand and adjusted his body to hold himself steady. After finishing this, he realized that something was wrong, because the rope was not broken, and when he looked up, the knife in Instructor Keith's hand suddenly stopped on his rope, and then cut Thomas' rope in an instant with a long blade in a lightning-fast manner. Aaron, huh? Thomas, how? What? Thomas, who was still looking at Aaron's face with a smile at this moment, almost scoffed out loud, not expecting Instructor Keith to suddenly stop cutting Aaron's rope and instead cut his rope. SHHHH. In a hurry, Thomas quickly clung to the cliff, and his body slid down half a position before he almost fell. After Thomas steadied his body, his forehead was covered in a cold sweat. Shit. Thomas wanted to curse, but seeing the instructor's bald head looking down at him over his head, he swallowed the bad words to himself. He couldn't be bothered. Next, Instructor Keith used his three-dimensional maneuvering equipment to fly to the top of Amin, a lovely boy and good friend of Aaron's. Instructor Keith looked at Amin's nervous face below him, smiled and raised his knife, swinging the blade along the rope. In fact, he admires Amin very much. Amin's theoretical notes have always been at the top of the list. Many combat plans and analytical ideas for problems in dangerous situations are striking. He has a rare kind of brain and ingenious talent, but his shortcomings are also obvious. Physical ability, what a pity. All sports subjects are barely passing. This is not enough, more focus should be put on getting stronger. Not far away, Takashi, who was climbing, also observed Amin, who was being looked after by Instructor Keith. He discovered that the clothes on Amin's back were soaked. How much sweat he had to sweat for his clothes to be like this. In fact, Amin was about to cry, his face was flushed, he was nervous for a moment and then relaxed. Every time he relaxed, Instructor Keith raised his knife with a blank expression and moved very fast. So Amin did not dare to be careless, as any mistake would be disastrous. Instructor Keith simply hung on Amin's head all the time, until Amin almost ate Keith's movements with his eyes, then flew to the top of other people's heads to train them. Amin finally breathed a sigh of relief, lying on the cliff and gasping, as if a great weight had been lifted off his shoulders. Instructor Keith flew to the top of Takashi's head, paused for a moment and looked at Takashi, who was calmly climbing up. Takashi looked at Instructor Keith, a bit watchful, but not too nervous. He was now making use of his chakra to move more easily. He also had an omnipotent Susanoo that could save his life in dangerous situations. However, with his chakra was enough, if the going got tough he would do his best to stay static with the help of his power. Instructor Keith just looked at Takashi and left, not intending to waste his energy. He has observed the boy below named Takashi. Although there are some bumps in the evaluation test, he usually trains very hard, and his talent is amazing. Almost always whenever he can he tries to improve his physical condition, his strength, speed, reflexes, balance and even brute force. Endurance fighting ability is different from ordinary people, it is like a monster. The only one who can compare with him in this regard is the girl with the same surname Ackerman. What is it with the Ackermans of this world? They are all monsters. What surprised him was that Takashi's theoretical courses were not bad, and there were no obvious deficiencies. Knowing that this can't be hard for Takashi, Instructor Keith wasted no time with him and rushed to throw the others to continue to excel. Anyone who has been served by Instructor Keith has a ghostly expression. Compared to other instructors who cut the ropes when you're not paying attention, Instructor Keith's acting skills are hands down better than movie actors, a real treat to train under his care. After more than an hour, there was a group of people lying on the grass above the cliff. Training to climb the cliff was not only exhausting but also very worrying. Aaron took a water bag and gave Armin a sip of water. Armin had collapsed at that moment, and only noticed that there were many Aaron in front of him. Thomas wiped the dirt off his pants. He looked around and found that Instructor Keith was not there. Damn, his bald head is so hateful, doesn't he have any feelings? Takashi didn't know how to answer Thomas' protests. Aaron and Thomas were a bit far away from him. He didn't know what happened, but thinking about Armin's situation, he estimated that Thomas' situation was very miserable. That's right, I almost died today, complained Connie. He also enjoyed a full surprise package from Instructor Keith. When he thought this training would continue tomorrow and last for half a year, he suddenly felt there was no quiet future ahead. Instructor Keith lived up to his words and squeezed everyone's bones. Actually, he didn't cut the ropes of some people, but still, many people almost fell down because of him. Only then will they be stronger in the future. Keith Shades looked at everyone in silence. Chapter 22, Riding a Horse. Just today the Garrison Corps sent about 280 horses to a green field outside the training corps base. Instructor Keith stood in front of all the soldiers who were getting more and more anxious to try riding a horse. Go pick out a horse you like. These are all good horses, and there are plenty of them. Remember, don't fight foolishly for a horse and have a good day. The 104th Training Corps South currently has 257 soldiers and about 280 horses were sent to them. Most of the remaining horses are to be returned and only leave a minimal amount in case they get lost, sick or injured. Takashi was excited as he walked among the numerous horses. The horses had already been tamed initially. They were not wild horses that were afraid of people and did not run. Of course, it's not like they are too obedient either. They just stand there, walking around and exploring the place with curiosity. I used to watch movies about horses, so I had some respect for the back kick they used to shoot at unfortunate times. In this world, horses are used to travel long distances without making use of three-dimensional maneuvering equipment. Using gas in trivial situations is not beneficial because of the limited contents of the tank. Therefore, horses are very necessary in this world. Most needed for the exploration corps, who are the ones who travel outside the walls the most. And these horses sent for training and practice are faster and smarter than the others. But in any case, riding horses is still very tempting for the children. Even Takashi was excited to choose a suitable horse. However, Takashi knew that horses could become man's best friend, and one of these in the crowd could save his life in the future. Takashi, being dazzled as he walked among so many horses, walked without thinking much about choosing one to ride. Many people did not know what to do like him. Instructor Keith said that people could choose any horse and look at the temperament to have a better judgment in riding it. Takashi felt that the bald instructor was talking nonsense. All the horses were tamed before sending them here. Suddenly, Takashi found a horse with black and white hair. The horse, like all the others, possessed a strong and elegant look, but that was not the point. Takashi knew it was not an illusion. He vaguely felt that the horse's eyes were a bit cold and the horse's face showed a mocking expression. With a decision in his heart, Takashi approached that arrogant horse and touched a handful of fodder. He walked towards the horse and stretched out his hand to hand it to it. The horse snorted, looked at Takashi and then lowered its head to eat the offered grass. Takashi, did he just look down on me? The atmosphere was a bit embarrassing. Takashi felt ignored by the horse and the horse didn't seem to be as tame as others. However, this was not his problem. Takashi reached out and stroked the mane of the horse's neck, but the horse was not happy and turned its head straight to look at him with its butt. Takashi, sir, I have to ride him today. Takashi took the reins, led the horse into his hands and handed him more fodder. The horse raised its head and looked at Takashi without moving, as if it was not going to eat the new food that came to it. Takashi, who was very observant, seemed to notice something, stroked the horse's head and passed the fodder down to the ground, and sure enough, the horse ate the fodder some time later. This horse is the one. Takashi nodded with relief. Without hesitation, he took this horse, just because it was the only one who looked down on him out of the whole group. When their eyes met, Takashi's heart twitched and he knew he was the one. Takashi looked around and found that most people were still hesitating, not knowing which one to choose. However, some people had already chosen a horse. In the distance he looked at Sasha, who was feeding her horse. Takashi had understood that this horse should accompany him during all his adventures, so he named his horse Barbers, the first name that came to his mind as revenge, and then started to feed the horse. Feeding the horses was a necessary task that had to be done every day. People must feed their horses once a day, so developing a bond between human and animal was necessary. Over time, the more special soldiers choose their horses, though many ended up choosing one at random. Takeshi looked at Eren pulling a tall, strong horse with bright golden hair, unruly eyes, completely ignoring Eren's feed. TKS, with such a fierce horse, Eren might have to suffer a bit. Takashi thought to himself. At that moment, Thomas also approached with his horse. Takashi, look, how is my Dorito? Thomas said proudly. His horse sure was handsome, with shiny hair and a well-proportioned physique. Before Takashi could answer, his barbers became annoyed because Takashi, who was about to say something to Thomas, unconsciously stopped paying attention to him. Barbers walked up to Thomas and headbutted him. Damn it, Takashi, what's wrong with your horse? Thomas bent down and looked at Barbers with a bit of surprise. This horse is too wild. Hey, isn't my horse, Barbers, too good-natured? Takashi asked with a proud look. Barbers snorted. Nate raised his head and looked at Takashi, motioning for him to continue stroking his back. Takashi was very pleased with Barbers's performance, so the skilled horse was able to unleash his wise ancestral martial arts. Thomas was a bit jealous, and when he looked at Dorito, who only knew how to bow his head and eat grass, he suddenly became depressed. The mornings of the next month were all riding sessions, rock climbing, and a month later he alternated between riding and weight training. The next day, after instructor Keith explained some riding knowledge and tips, the riding training began. As long as you ride faster than instructor Keith, you are qualified. It soon became clear that riding a horse was not a pleasant thing, at least at first it was quite uncomfortable. Riding a horse and running off doesn't mean you can ride a horse, because fools can. Beginners usually don't have a good posture and make the horse's behavior flail. Once you learn the correct riding position, there will be no problems in the future. It is a preliminary learning to ride a horse. Then comes the speed control and communication with the horse. Usually you don't have a proper pointer planned at the beginning. When there was a connection between humans and animals, everything was easier. It was essential to understand the behavior of the horse and the horse to understand the intentions of the rider. In the last few days after riding, many people almost vomited. Their hips ached and their buttocks ached, so they did not dare to sit down. An interesting scene appeared in the dining room. These days, many people are eating standing up. The worst was poor Aaron. The beautiful golden horse he chose was really unruly. He had already been knocked down 3 times and suffered several blows. Mikasa was very distressed for Aaron's safety. After a while the noble protagonist couldn't take it anymore. He threatened to eat the horse if it didn't cooperate in practice. Takashi secretly said that it was a pity that he had not eaten meat for a long time. Due to the fall of the Mary Wall, humans lost a third of their territory and the price of meat skyrocketed to unattainable prices. However, it was a pity that Aaron's golden horse became friendlier in the days that followed. In this way, little by little the next month arrived. After 2 months of riding training, everyone at least learned to ride a horse. There is also more and more tacit understanding between Takashi and Barbers. Basically, her horse can respond quickly to Takashi's signals. Takashi can now call himself an experienced old rider. Run. In the empty wasteland, a group of training corps soldiers ran wildly on their horses, and instructor Keith drove his own horse to chase after them. Anyone caught making mistakes would always get a surprise at the end of the day. Takashi took the lead, adjusted his stance, sat with a good posture, and Barbers rode into the dust. No matter how fast the others rode, they would be more than 2 horses behind him. The relationship between riding and fitness had nothing to do with it, because the fitness of the remaining training soldiers was not bad, but after all it was about a horse's own strength. In short, Barbers was really a fast horse. During the riding test, whether overcoming obstacles or comparing speed, he almost never lost. In terms of horsemanship, he was number 1 among the soldiers training. Chapter 23, Deployment Simulation, 1. After 2 months of riding training, the soldiers could at least ride properly. At the end of the month of the year 848, a very important test began that would give a special simulation for the experience of all soldiers. Instructor Keith stood on the high platform in the large general yard of the base, pointed to a map of a special route behind him on a sign and said, "The riding training has come to an end for the time being. This time there will be a test of a march in a wasteland and the content of this training is very simple, so simple that any of you with your tiny abilities can easily pass." Everyone was now familiar with the bald instructor to such an extent that they have no resentment in their heart, and even some in this situation want to laugh a little. The test of a wilderness marching simulation is the last evaluation before the next month's days off, and although it is not included in the final score, it is also something very important for all the graduating soldiers to learn from. There are now only about 250 soldiers in the training corps, some people in the riding tests were eliminated and some more in the climbing training. There are some currently injured, but as long as they are not serious injuries, they can continue in the training corps. The soldiers of the training corps in this test will be divided into two groups, each group with an experienced instructor and another with the role of analyzing the development, setting off on two different courses. Around the forest in front of the base, both groups will march 2 routes rolling the forest. After that the squads should meet at the destination, exchange information about the march route and return to the core base by the other squad's route, which is more or less a different route. The total distance is about 50 kilometers. Riding on horseback, the soldiers should carry their 3-dimensional maneuvering equipment. They should not ride too fast. They should spend at least one night outdoors before returning to base. Takashi knew that this type of test was done so that the soldiers would be familiar with important deployments. No matter what corps they ultimately go to, everyone at some point will have to fight for this world, and it is something that many of the commanders now and before knew. Instructor Keith, standing on the high platform, continued to spit words into the lecture and with a different tone of voice said, "Listen to me, even in normal times, you are all soldiers. You must maintain vigilance and the will to fight at all times, no matter what the situation is. You cannot survive without a developed sense of crisis. Be patient with this training and learn all you need to. This test is about increasing your sense of crisis and becoming familiar with this experience. Everyone will be in 2 different groups according to the list created, with 123 people in each group. The first squad leader of this group is Horatio Nelson. The analyst will be Amin Alert. The second squad leader of the second group is Takashi Ackerman. The analyst will be Mikasa Ackerman. With the roles of squad leader and analyst, the 2 groups were ready to embark on their journey. These roles were to also simulate the roles of the instructors on the trip. Each person was selected according to their capabilities. Therefore, Instructor Keith gave an order and everyone must act immediately. Takashi quickly put on the 3-dimensional maneuvering equipment, lightly touched Barber's head and mounted his horse. Seeing that many were still preparing, he took the map in his hand and looked at it carefully. On this trip there was no hurry. If he rode at full speed, the 40 kilometers were not far at all. However, since it was a simulation, basically everyone should be alert and travel with caution. Mikasa prepared a notebook and pen to record what happened along the way and at any time. As the squad leader of Group 2, Takashi carefully planned the route under the supervision of the 2 instructors. After all, there was no set path and the route they set will be followed by the other group. Mikasa at this point should be very careful to note down in detail the path they will take and the performance of all the soldiers in their group. If the 4 instructors discover that each other's marching route and landmark records are incorrect, then the whole group will have to have points deducted, and Takashi will naturally not dare to be careless. Otherwise it will be bad if his skills are called into question and he would not be the only one affected by his mistakes. Of course, they must also be on the lookout for any dangers that might arise on the march. Everything was subject to change and how each group performed. This training is just as Instructor Keith said it would be. Normally, it is not a difficult test. As long as care is taken, there is nothing wrong with the results. The question Takashi asks himself is, will there really be no accidents? With the characteristics he already knew about exploration corps expeditions, everything is always subject to change. Takashi looked at his group that was ready, and the other group were also ready. The instructors had not spoken so far. Everyone remained silent, watching all the development that the recruits were doing. Once the instructions were given, the selected leaders should order accordingly. Takashi and Mikasa were at the front of the group, Looking at everyone seriously, Takashi said, "All right, we will start the trip now. We will start with a medium speed and after half an hour the speed will drop to half. Remember to form groups of 10, don't get separated and keep a safe distance. The groups on the sides and in front should keep their eyes open. This test is subject to change, so we must be prepared." After giving the order, Takashi turned the reins of the horse and started to ride. Everyone else followed with a surprised look. The instructors put on a surprised look. There was no recruit with Takashi's experience that would fit his role naturally. One only needed to look at Nelson on the other side of the group to know that it was not an easy role. However, within moments recruit Takashi adapted to his role and commanded accordingly naturally. Mikasa on her side began to jot down Takashi's orders and the pace of speed. She also took it upon herself to pre-sign the initial route Takashi proposed. Initially, Takashi had placed the people he knew the most at the front of the group, to have an easier time ordering when mentioning their names. As in the original series, Takashi had seen and observed expeditions with experienced commanders. He knew how to order and what could happen along the way. Although it is a test, if it is a simulation, changes should happen. The long lines of horses rode forward. At the same time, Nelson, on the other side, set off with his entire group. Besides Takashi and Mikasa, Reina, Berthold, Annie, Yama and Thomas were in the second group. As for Nelson and Armin from Class 1, Eren, Jean, Sasha, Krista, Connie and Mina among others were in Class 1. It could be said that both groups were very balanced. Takashi was riding on Baba's back, admiring the natural scenery of the wasteland and, to be honest, it still felt unreal. After passing a rocky slope 2 hours later, Takashi turned around, dismounted and ordered, "Okay, stop and rest for half an hour." Takashi was sitting on a rock and the route was about to extend into the forest in the afternoon, which also meant spending the night in the forest, which was never a safe place. He took a sip of water and waved for the small squadron leaders to come here. "Is there a meeting?" Mikasa, Reina, Yama and the others approached after hearing the words. Takashi did not hesitate and said seriously, and it was rare for him to be serious, "We have to enter the forest at about 3 in the afternoon, and according to the schedule, we have to spend the night in the forest." Reina frowned. "It's not a good option to spend the night in the forest." Yama said, "There are many beasts in the forest. Do you want to organize a group to keep the safe?" Thomas knew more about Takashi. "What did you think of?" Takashi's expression was a bit serious. "The beasts in the forest are the second things we should worry about." He unfolded the map in front of everyone and said, "According to the normal speed, we have to spend the night in this area. There is only a small road that goes through the edge of the forest and connects the 2 nearby villages, which means there may be people in the forest. If it's an ordinary person, that's it. However, you can't rule out that there are thieves hiding here. After all, this place is too far away from the villages, and after stealing, you can hide in the forest." The same is true on Nelson's side. The 2 roads go through the forest and connect the 2 villages. Mikasa's expression was a bit worried, not worried for herself, but for Eren's safety. "Little devils, we have a three-dimensional maneuvering team, so we don't need to fear common bandits," Yama said with a mischievous tongue. The relationship between Takashi and Yama was becoming normal, after that conversation they had. Takashi opens his hands. Who can guarantee that they don't have guns? Although there are muskets in this world, it would be hard to survive a gunshot. However, even though it might be difficult to have a gun, those possibilities should not be ruled out. Berthold said, "Can we spend the night outside the forest?" Rainer shook his head. I'm afraid not. Getting to this point, the horses in the forest can be better maintained, otherwise if we spend the night out of the forest it will delay the change of routes. Takashi continued, do not worry too much, the presence of bandits is just a guess, but be careful, not everyone can be too far away from the main force. It is better not to take off the three-dimensional equipment, and even if it is removed, they should be responsible to keep it in sight. If they see something suspicious, no matter how small, they can comment on it without worry. If the situation is worrisome, you can subdue the enemy on the spot. If there is no chance of subduing them, do what is necessary to maintain your safety even if you have to take lives. Everyone looked at Takashi with some surprise. Even though they were all soldiers in training, it was still unacceptable to kill someone. Killing a human and killing a titan were two different things. Thomas swallowed saliva. Killing, even if it's a thief, can be a very complicated thing, right? This is the real situation. If you want to choose between subduing the enemy with the possibility of getting hurt, go ahead. Takashi said with a sigh. Everyone looked at Takashi, as if they had met him again. He is not usually very rude, and he did not expect to be so resolute at a critical moment. After finishing the conversation, the instructors walked away along with the other soldiers. They had all been briefed, so they were prepared. Half an hour later, Takashi's group left again. In the afternoon, they gradually moved deeper into the forest. By this time, everyone was much more alert. As Takashi said, traveling a distance ahead, there was a path on the right side of the forest, connecting two small villages in the distance. This place would be too ideal to raid. If the forest really is harboring robbers, it would be good to be prepared to face them. Class 1 on the other side was much more animated than Class 2, since Eren and Jean were fighting again. Chapter 24, Deployment Simulation, 2. Eren and Jean Kirstein's dispute was about a fox that they considered edible, but everyone knew that this was a trivial matter. After hearing Sasha say that foxes can be eaten, both of them with an arrogant look went hunting, and from one moment to the next they started fighting. Eren, who couldn't find any fox, stopped Jean and blamed him for being so rowdy. To be honest, the relationship between Eren and Jean is very strange. After the ordeal on the mountain, Jean understood a little bit about why Eren wanted to join the Exploration Corps, but the two hardheads fought very often over very absurd things. The strangest thing about their behavior is that no matter how hard the fight is, after a fight, both of them can communicate normally after a few days. Jean told Armin to write down what happened. Let's report it. Just put that Eren Giga's actions obstructed the group's food supply, fate because of his arrogant shortcomings. Eren was angry when he heard Jean's words and gritted his teeth. You bastard. Seeing that the trouble was about to resume again, Nelson immediately intervened and said, stop fighting, Armin, don't point that out, it's just a meaningless little fight. Armin was a bit overwhelmed for a while, but in the end, he secretly wrote down the incident impartially and completely, including everyone's reactions. There was a lot of high-pitched noise from Jean's side, yet no one noticed the possible danger in the woods ahead for Group 1. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Takashi's group had strayed deeper into the forest. Takashi and the others had been clearing the ground in a relatively open space. They found no anomalies at the moment, except for the hard-to-clean ground. Mikasa was recording some topographical features of this place, and Takashi was standing on a stone looking at the map. Most of the crowd sat on the grass to drink water or feed the horses. The old horse, Barbers, studied the scenery inside the forest and began to eat grass, ignoring Takashi completely. However, Takashi suddenly focused his ears on the surrounding noises. feeling that everything was going well for the test that should be a bit more complicated in the first place. His experiences as a hunter and those things he had to pay attention to in the forest to hunt had been imprinted on the current Takashi, so he immediately acted on his instincts. Shoo! Takashi jumped off the stone and immediately pulled out two swords. These are the ideal tools against the Titans. They are sword blades found on the sides of the body of the three-dimensional maneuvering equipment. According to the theory classes, they are sword blades made of a steel alloy modified to be super strong. Therefore, they would work to wipe out any living thing that might exist in the world. What's wrong? Reina and the others were about to ask, but Takashi motioned for him to stop talking. Takashi walked into the forest on the left side of the team, and Reina and the others followed him silently. A soldier named Daz was in the forest, and the three-dimensional maneuvering equipment was laid out on the grass next to him. Initially he didn't want to take it off when he heard Takashi's words, but then he felt tired, so he relaxed for a moment in a place where he wouldn't be looked at. Daz, who was resting, didn't notice that a long hand came out of the bush and silently picked up his three-dimensional maneuvering equipment. His appearance was typical of black-hooded thieves. This thief was actually just a special test member of Takashi's team. According to the instructions, the group that pretended to be thieves would approach the settlements of both teams to rob and kidnap. This was something Takashi had expected. The test was very important to take into account all these factors. Unexpectedly for Daz, he was the first to fall victim to the test for not following Takashi's directions. Whatever happens now may be within the test, let's not rule out that they are instructors in disguise. Takashi slipped through the trees and shouted, "Stop!" The instructor froze as he was caught, putting Daz's gear on the ground, quickly pulling out a knife and running towards Takashi and the others. "Let's take care of him, Reina." Takashi gave an order and pointed. The others watched the surroundings. Maybe he's not the only thief. Understood. Takashi, Reina and Thomas slowly approached towards the thief. Takashi's eyes shrunk and he picked up a stone from the ground. Making use of his chakra on the surface of the stone, he slowly prepared himself in secret. When Reina was closer to the thief, Takashi threw the stone with precision. Boom! The stone flew straight towards the thief's blade he was holding with one hand, as fast as a sharp arrow. At this moment, the thief was thinking about how to escape from this place. It would be very embarrassing to be caught by some recruits. Metallic noise. The stone that had hit the thief's weapon directly, caused due to the great impact the blade flew out of his hands, and with a metallic clang it fell to the ground far away from the thief. The thief was stunned for a moment. He wanted to pick up his weapon again. However, Takashi had quickly used his three-dimensional maneuvering equipment to appear at the thief's back. The hooded figure of the thief stopped abruptly, and before he could raise his fist, a cold metal blade rested on his neck and a slight blood stain could be seen due to the edge so close to his skin. Takashi looked at the bandit with indifference. "If you waste my time again, beware of losing your head." The bandit, who was an instructor, shivered. His eyes scanned the cold blade on his neck and slowly raised his hands to signal his surrender. At that moment, Thomas and Reina ran over, grabbed the bandit's arms and held him tightly. Takashi on his side put away his swords and the blade that the bandit had dropped on the ground and picked up Daz's three-dimensional maneuvering equipment. The thief was caught without loss. As Takashi handed over the three-dimensional maneuvering equipment to Daz, he looked at the crowd watching the thief who entered the vicinity without anyone noticing and said coldly, "Daz, I think I was very direct when I mentioned that you should take care of your equipment if you decided to take it off to rest. However, you almost lost your equipment in the first second of taking it off. As soldiers, you must be careful and know that this is not just a test. Daz looked scared and was sweating profusely. No, I'll be careful next time. That doesn't matter to me, concentrate on the test and don't make me waste my time again. Takashi looked at everyone and said, every 2 hours a roll call will be taken of the soldiers along with their equipment. We will set up a surveillance routine and everyone must move in groups of 2. Understood. Everyone started to move. They knew it was just a thief, but they couldn't be careless like Daz a moment ago. Looking at Daz, Takashi knows that Daz's training performance is relatively low, but he also knows that if he loses the 3-dimensional maneuvering equipment, Instructor Keith will make him feel much more than embarrassed. He might even be kicked out of the training corps. Ignoring Daz, he looked back. Yama had tied the thief with a rope. Mikasa grabbed the thief's hood, which was the face of a middle-aged man with messy hair and a scar on his forehead. Takashi approached the thief. Tell me, how many people are with you, what kind of weapons do they have and where did the others go? Mikasa had no affection for kidnappers and thieves at all, and kicked the middle-aged thief, and just asked if they were a group or alone. Takashi's eyes jumped. He didn't think Mikasa would act so rashly against a thief who was possibly an instructor in disguise. However, he adapted to the script and waited silently. The middle-aged thief looked at Takashi. His forehead was covered with sweat and he did not speak. Takashi directly pulled out the knife from his equipment and said, I admire your hard bones. I can cut off your fingers one by one. Do you want to try? No, you can't do this to me. I just wanted to steal some 3-dimensional maneuvering equipment. I didn't kill anyone. You have no right to torture me. I'm on my own. The thief shouted resentfully. So you know about the equipment you were trying to steal. Now I'm more sure you're possibly an instructor. Takashi thought to himself as he brought the knife slowly towards the thief's fingers. Then you'll have to tell me what it feels like to lose a few fingers. Reina, Annie, Yama and Mikasa watched silently without saying anything. These people actually have their own backgrounds before they decided to enter the training corps, though not otherworldly. Their experiences are no more complicated than Takashi's. Thomas was a little uncomfortable with Takashi's behavior of pulling out a knife when the thief did not agree to tell his secrets. Thomas, why doesn't everyone react at all? I'm the only normal person in the group. Stop, Recruit Ackerman. They are not allowed to perform physical torture with abnormalities that occur during training. An instructor came over and said, you'd better speak up and tell us what you know. I'm not playing. The thief looked at the instructors and after some intimidation, finally the thief confessed most of the information he knew. He definitely thought that if it wasn't that way, the black-haired girl would cut off his fingers without thinking. When Takashi and the others learned that the group of thieves had 15 thieves in addition to the unfortunate one who fell into their hands, they were all worried when they learned that they were armed with swords and bows. Especially when they heard that they all went to Eren and Nelson's side. Mikasa and Yama couldn't sit still. Mikasa was worried about Eren, but Yama was worried about the goddess Krista. We're safe on this side of the forest, but Eren and the others will have a hard time. Reina's expression was a bit heavy, although these thieves seemed to only want to steal their 3-dimensional maneuvering equipment and had no intentions of harming people. In a direct conflict anything could happen. We should go and see the situation on Eren's side. Yama said. Are you going to give up the training mission? Thomas asked. At that moment, Annie walked up and said, I found the tracks left by the fire the robbers made, and the tracks of 3 carriages. Of course, Takashi knew this was part of the test and perhaps he was the only one who realized this. Looking at the instructors, he made up his mind. He waved his hands and said, "We will make a special group of our troops to scout the situation in Nelson's group. Reina, Mikasa, Thomas and Yama, you four will be in charge of going with your three-dimensional maneuvering equipment to find Team 1 and brief them on the situation. Leave immediately, I will take care of briefing the rest of them on our situation." Understood. Mikasa couldn't wait, so she handed the logbook to Takashi. "Wait a minute, remember not to seriously hurt the robbers. I'm not sure, but possibly this is a test," he said to Reina in a low voice. Reina was stunned for a moment. He looked at the instructor on the ground and nodded after recovering. "Damn, if so Mikasa hit an instructor." Yama smiled coldly and walked away next to Reina, a little calmer at the thought of that possibility. Takashi handed the record book and pen to Thomas and said, "Now it's up to you to be the recorder." "Okay, Takashi." Thomas took the book and started to write the events now. Takashi also wants to go, but there are more than 100 people here who also need someone to guide them, and it is not safe to be in the forest at night. Takeshi approached the crowd, and after learning that Daz almost had his three-dimensional maneuvering equipment stolen, everyone was much more cautious and didn't dare to be alone. Chapter 25, Deployment Simulation, 3. The situation has been affected by the thief we caught a moment ago. I sent a special team so that the first team is informed. Takashi stood in front of everyone and pointed out, "There will be 3 special groups during the night. The first group will be in charge of taking care of the horses, while the second to take roll call every 2 hours as we have been doing so far, and lastly the final group will be in charge of keeping watch during the night." Under Takashi's orders, everyone began to move in an orderly fashion. If the thieves' goal is only to steal the three-dimensional maneuvering equipment, the horses could also be a target of their plans. Considering that the instructors went to Eren's group to try to steal them, Takashi was a bit calmer at that point. However, he was not to let his guard down against a possible enemy attack during the night. Later, in the dark, in front of the campfire, Takashi was sitting on a stone and volunteered as part of the group to keep watch tonight. It was already 9 o'clock at night. Even in the summer, when the stars and moon were in full bloom, it was completely dark in the forest at 7 o'clock. It was difficult to continue on the road. Takashi had assigned a special group of people to observe different spots during the night, while the others were lying in their sleeping bags. Thomas approached and said, "Takashi, are you worried about the others?" Takashi rubbed his forehead and denied matter-of-factly, "No, they are all trained to deal with this kind of threat without any problem, but I hope they are okay. By the way, is there a situation?" Thomas shook his head and noted, "Everything is normal so far." The horses were placed in a wide spot to be watched, while the shifts were assigned. "Very well, you must be careful." Takashi was a little distracted. So far he thought it would be the end if someone killed them, just as it would be the end if a titan hit them while they were distracted. If they were thieves, Takashi wouldn't have rested until he saw them all tied up in a tree. Only until now did he understand that not only must he watch out for titans, people are also something he must pay attention to. This may be just a simple test, but that does not detract from the fact that it is very much related to reality. I could only hope that Reina and Mikasa along with the others would arrive on time. Many important points for some of the other teams might be lost. There was nothing major happening all night. Takashi and Thomas switched shifts in the middle of the night, so from their side there was no problem. Early first thing in the morning, the sun slowly started to rise. After everyone finished breakfast, Takashi resumed their journey with the others. Approximately 2 hours later, they arrived at the intersection where the two teams were originally supposed to meet, but Group 1 did not arrive. After waiting a long time, it was only after a few hours that Team 1 arrived at 11 o'clock in the morning, evidently arriving late. Reina, Mikasa and the others were also in Group 1. Takashi could see that the morale of everyone in Group 1 was obviously low. Krista's eyes were depressed and Yama was comforting her on the side. "Wow, looks like they got the worst of it," Thomas muttered under his breath. "What was that all about?" Takashi was intrigued. "You were right, they were instructors disguised as thieves. Unfortunately for Group 1, several got hurt," Annie said with a cold stare. Takashi approached and found that many of the cadets were injured. It seems that the instructors were not very careful with them. Eren, Jean, Armin and Nelson along with the others were on their horses in a very bad mood. "Did it go that bad?" Takashi asked Armin, who was riding his horse slowly. Armin was a little sad to tell what happened. The group of instructors attacked Class 1 at night and took Krista hostage along with other careless cadets. The soldiers were very uncared for. They didn't even have optimal organization in the group. Then they stole a lot of three-dimensional maneuvering equipment. It is not known how they were able to steal so much equipment. When it was discovered that something was wrong, they desperately tried to get the equipment and the hostages back. When there was a direct confrontation, things got out of control and a painful fight broke out between instructors and soldiers. Unfortunately, some soldiers were wounded by the instructors. Fortunately, Nelson acted immediately, ordering torches to be dropped and fire spread to better identify the assailants. Just when everything seemed to become more brutal, the team that was sent by Takashi surprised the instructors from behind, quickly ending the test. Some were injured in the ankles, there were cuts with swords, which was quite dangerous. Not to mention that in the forest there is no safe method to take care of serious wounds. With the medical level, it is difficult for them to recover from infections or much more delicate wounds. There was one soldier who wedged a knife in his leg, which generated considerable blood loss and quite possibly that cadet will die. Jean expressed her helplessness and said, "If we had not been careless, if we had been alert during the test, there would not be so many wounded." No one knows the answer, and no one knows what the outcome will be until a decision is made. Eren did not respond. After one of his teammates was seriously injured, he wanted to take his anger out on the instructors, but Armin and Connie stopped him. This test was to be taken strictly without hesitation. This is just more than their fault for not being responsible. Takashi had many words to say to Group 1, but he knew that was not his responsibility and left that role to Instructor Keith. He could only leave one question in his memory: what would have happened if they were in Titan territory? After checking that everything was all right, the two groups exchanged waybills and soon after resumed their way without delay to the base of the training corps. Takashi called Mikasa, Yama, Reina and the others to join the group. Compared to the agitated state they left in, they returned a bit calmer. Although there were no injuries in Group 2, after all the injuries in Group 1, everyone was silent when they found out what happened in Group 1. Thomas suddenly said, "It is very possible that that soldier who was injured today in this test will not be able to graduate. If he manages to come out of this experience alive, he will know better than anyone that life is very important. The edge of swords, knives and arrows have no eyes or feelings. A normal person can die after receiving a cut. There really is no time to hesitate when on the battlefield, let alone in this world. That's what we face coming here, what assures us to go on living tomorrow. One little slip up, it only takes one breath for everything to go dark in our consciousness." Takashi smiled slightly and pointed out, we have to fight, for the fallen and the future. The least before my death I will make a significant change in this world. Playing and being carefree in this test, the cadet who was injured simply said he didn't want to die. What an idiot! If he doesn't want to die, why be a soldier in the first place? Krista felt guilty, everyone felt guilty. Yama said with a cold look. It was reckless. I heard that Krista was the one who warned that there were thieves in their group. They really could have stolen even their horses otherwise. Takashi said with a slight smile. Regaining morale is only a matter of time. If they don't do it just by having this small loss, once they become soldiers and have more than just a wounded comrade, they will possibly drop out of the army. Thomas stopped abruptly when he heard Takashi's words. He knew what he meant. In the afternoon, both groups returned to the training corps base. Lined up in the long courtyard, Instructor Keith stood on the high wooden platform with a grim expression and looked at the soldiers. Instructor Keith had 2 sheets of the analysis during the trip and a route map with the path laid out and said with a roar, I will post this on the bulletin board later. Everyone should look at the performance of the other class and compare it with their own performance, especially those in Group 1. I've told you many times. Even though most of you are teenagers around 15 years old, you are not village people picking up rocks, you are soldiers. Remember that you are always and at all times soldiers. Always be alert and maintain a will to fight at all times. Everyone fell silent. Nelson, Armin and Aaron lowered their heads even more embarrassed. Damn! Nelson cursed under his breath. He couldn't help but blame himself for not playing a better role as the leader of Group 1. Some time later, in Instructor Keith's office, Nelson, Armin, Micaiah, Thomas and Takashi reported on their assigned work in both groups. The explanation may be very detailed, but Instructor Keith needed to know what happened, especially the performance of both groups. After the report, Instructor Keith did not make any comments. Armin couldn't help but ask, what about the recruit who was injured? Keith looked at Armin and said, he is under observation. He lost a lot of blood, so it is not assured that he will be able to return to the training corps later. Hopefully there will be no aftermath from his injuries. Armin was silent and did not speak. Mikasa patted Armin on the shoulder and said, let's go. Keith watched the 3 leave and looked at Takashi saying, your orders were very wise, I hope you won't make mistakes later. Of course not, I'm retiring. Takashi said with a military salute. A few days later, the soldiers of the training corps took a few days off, quite a few days off, but they were also the last days off of the year. In the end, it turned out that the cadet who was wounded in the leg died from a high temperature in his body, not far from the base where his body was buried, where the recruits who died in all generations due to accidents and the result of various training were normally buried. For a long time, the training corps has trained countless outstanding soldiers to defend the walls and fight titans, maintain order and protect the king. Generations of recruits grew up here, or died, or otherwise began their legends. The days off have started. Some people go straight home to visit their families and homeless people stay at the base. No one knows what will happen in the future. As Mikasa said, this world is cruel and beautiful. In the office, Instructor Keith sorted out the results of the soldiers' evaluation in the last training. Undoubtedly, as recruits, this group of teenagers still has a long way to go. As for what kind of soldiers they will become in the future, he doesn't know, but he will silently witness and send blessings from here for all of them. Chapter 26, Dream and Sword. Tonight, Takashi had a strange dream where he was swinging a dagger over and over again. The dagger was cutting meat and animals non-stop. Takashi couldn't do anything to stop it. Just when he thought he couldn't wake up, the dream abruptly ended. What was that? Takashi wondered silently. On the second day of vacation, some people took these days off to go home, but now more people stayed at the base to train rigorously. Unconsciously for everyone, a year has passed and now they are familiar with training every day. It could be said that it is a bit uncomfortable to stop training. Keith silently expressed his good humor at seeing so many corporals training at the base. In a warehouse, Thomas and Takashi were doing their assigned work at the base. By the way, Thomas, are you really not going home this time? Takashi asked Thomas while also cleaning the warehouse. I won't go back this time. My performance over the past few months, I feel like it has lagged behind. How can I keep up with you if I don't train much harder than before? This time I'll stay here to keep training in areas where I suck the most, replied Thomas with a determined look on his face. Well, if you go home at least you wouldn't have to clean this place. Takashi dragged a box of trash outside. You're right about that, no need to mention it. Thomas agreed. Instructor Keith is really very good at giving jobs to the people who stay at the training core base during the days off. Every second day after the days off start, he calls in a lot of the soldiers to clean all the buildings on the base. This time it was Thomas and Takashi's turn to clean the warehouse. Only until now he discovered that there were many things in the warehouse. The warehouse that Takashi and Thomas were cleaning was dedicated to storing damaged three-dimensional maneuvering equipment, blades, horse saddles and the like. Instructor Keith, in addition to being bald, is very cruel. He directly ordered that we clean the base right after the holidays began. Thomas complained. Takashi, who was sorting various kinds of debris, suddenly found a sword next to a bow with a few dozen arrows. The sword was too hidden in the corner of the room, being covered by the bow and quiver of arrows. Takashi took the sword and observed the condition of the blade. Apparently it had no deficiency and remained in perfect condition. Amazing. Takashi looked admiringly at the longsword. The straight handguard and unusual pommel allow it to stand out from other swords. The exceptional craftsmanship combined durability with a realistic look, so if treated correctly it would serve him for a long time. Takashi knew that this was a gentleman's sword, something unusual to find in this world. Thinking it might be useful, Takashi put the sword aside and then asked Instructor Keith if he could keep it for training. Taking the bow, he checked it for flaws. Sure. Hey, it turned out to be in good condition. Takashi touched the bowstring, a little surprised. Bows and arrows are useless to us, Thomas said disapprovingly and then looked at the sword with its sheath on Takashi's shoulder. There are no archery classes in the training corps. After all, bows and arrows are useless for killing titans. It can be used for hunting, just in time since we received days off. Don't you want to eat meat? Takashi smiled. Finally he could eat some meat. He remembers that time he ate bear meat, something very unusual lately due to the demand. Currently, there is a shortage of meat everywhere inside the walls and basically only nobles and businessmen with money can enjoy it. Of course, soldiers can hunt in training, inspections and raids outside and inside the walls. Thomas swallowed saliva and said somewhat excitedly, I can't hunt, can you? Of course, you forgot I'm a hunter. Oh, you have to bring Sasha too. Takashi felt that wasn't a problem, it was time to make a nice meaty meal. You mean Sasha? I heard that she is also a hunter and from the same village as you. Maybe with your help I can really eat meat. Thomas was also interested in trying the meat. The two were immediately energized and the warehouse, which was not necessarily clean in the morning, was cleaned before 4 o'clock in the afternoon. You can see that sometimes efficiency at work is actually related to attitude, completely different from working bored to being enthusiastic and positive. Takashi was also interested in being able to make the sword his own. He had to ask instructor Keith's approval first to get it officially and not steal it. On the other hand, Sasha was struggling to draw water from the well and Krista offered to help him. I can do it myself, thank you for your help, Krista. Sasha thanked politely. Yuma, on the other hand, wasn't used to Sasha's overly polite way of speaking and scoffed, "Hey, you, I've had enough of you." "Excuse me." Sasha didn't quite know how to act. "With that idiotic and formal tone you use when talking, why are you talking to us as you if we are of the same rank?" Yuma looked at Sasha waiting for answers. "Well, it's just that I." "Why do I do that?" "Stop, let me guess." Yuma smirked and said, "You're embarrassed to be heard speaking in your native accent, aren't you? You're so worried about what they think of you, but what a fool you are. You know how to hunt any kind of wild beasts, but you are afraid of people. You don't have a good reason to become a soldier either, do you? Did you run away from your parents?" After saying that, Krista stepped in and pointed, "Yuma, leave her alone." Yuma didn't want to let Sasha go, so she pushed Krista away with her head and pointed out, "Sasha, you can't live lying forever. Are you always going to rule your life by what others think of you? I don't think you're that much of an idiot. Relax and focus on being yourself, speak as you please." Sasha realized that Yuma wasn't specifically making fun of her. "I appreciate the comment. That's very kind of you." "What?" "I hope you'll forgive me. It's still hard for me to speak normally." In fact, Yuma also has her gentle side, but her experience is too complicated and her past is too dark. Krista hit Yuma, "Don't bother her. She can't change the way she talks just because you say so. Sasha, decide for yourself who you want to be, all your words come from the heart, I like you just the way you are. Again with your lectures, I hope Sasa can change the way she talks, she gets on my nerves." Yuma said. "Easy Sasha, not everyone is as bitter as Yuma," said Krista as she approached Sasha. Yuma was embarrassed for Krista, and Sasha couldn't help but laugh. At that moment, Takashi and Thomas, who were a bit dirty, also came out of the warehouse. Takashi looked around for a while. Many people were hanging out and chatting. Thomas and he had the bad luck to clean the warehouse. Takashi saw Sasha and Krista by the well and walked over with Thomas. "Hey, Sasha, are you free?" Thomas couldn't wait to tell Sasha that they were going hunting together. "What's up, monkey, you want something with Sasha?" Yuma still replied with a vicious tongue. Thomas' smile froze and his face flushed. In all honesty, though Sasha was a food enthusiast, she was pretty, but he had no intention of hitting on girls today. "Wow, the giant witch can't help but shut her mouth." Takashi smiled teasingly. "Takashi, I try to like you but I can't stand you sometimes. I never expected you to befriend a monkey, how embarrassing." Yuma said as she looked at Thomas. "Come on grandma, relax, we're not here to look for you." Takashi clicked his teeth. "You." Yuma was angry with Takashi's jokes. A while ago she called her a giant and only her and Krista understood that joke. So she wanted to hit Takashi today, no other way to vent her anger. Krista hugged Yuma, who was about to go crazy. After what happened months ago, she had a good relationship with Takashi and she knew that her intentions with Yuma were not bad at all. Takashi and Yuma had also been familiar with each other. Even if Takashi doesn't talk much with Yuma, they knew each other's darkest secrets. From time to time, Takashi likes to make jokes about giants in front of Yuma, which infuriates Yuma to the point of losing his sanity. Although she knew it might be a touchy subject how Yuma acquired the same ability as Eren, he wanted Yuma to feel that it was nothing wrong to have that kind of ability. Takashi ignored Yuma and invited Sasha to go hunting with him, though at first he told her that there was something delicious to share with her. Hunting, do you have any tools? Sasha was a little excited. It had been a long time since she had last eaten meat. So she missed hunting as well. Holding up the bow and arrow in his hand, Takashi smiled. I found it in the warehouse, are you coming? Sasha swallowed saliva, her eyes burning with motivation and said, yes, let's go hunting, we have to hunt in the morning. We want a share of whatever they find, we're going to. Yuma pointed to himself and Krista. Although he felt Takashi and Sasha could easily hunt some prey, Yuma pointed for Krista. Krista resisted a bit. Yuma, this is not good. Takashi smiled and said he didn't mind, it's okay, let's go together. He had no intention of eating alone. If he caught a prey, he would invite his friends to have dinner together. Krista wanted to say something else, but Yuma directly covered her small mouth with his hand. Don't worry, you are so thin, you won't get fat if you eat some meat. It's such a nice decision. Yuma, we'll meet tomorrow. Takashi felt there was nothing wrong with doing it this way. It might even bring his relationship with Yuma a little closer and find out a little more about her. They made the appointment to go out together tomorrow morning. Takashi and Thomas left happily. If everything goes well tomorrow, they can have extra meals and something more amazing, meat. After returning to take a shower, Takashi ran to the back mountain to begin practicing with the sword he found and a fist technique he remembered from his past life. Although he was inexperienced, he would at least try to carefully mimic the fighting styles. It's time to start linking chakra with my attacks. More than a year has passed and the physical qualities of Takashi's body are amazing. The amount of chakra and the way he can employ it have increased. Now, his overall strength has reached a very high level that very few in the training corps could match. Considering the Susanoo as his last card, he needed to employ all possible methods so as not to lose useful life unnecessarily. It sounds a bit silly, but Takashi didn't want to use his Susanoo if he didn't have to. And without the help of the three-dimensional maneuvering equipment, he wanted to at least deal with 3 to 5 meter titans with the use of his sword and chakra. If chakra could increase the sharpness and durability of the sword, he could take out titans easily. After all, chakra could be employed in many ways. Chapter 27, The Hunt. The next morning, Takashi and Thomas came out in their training suits after feeding the horses. Sasha, Krista and Yuma were already waiting by a water hole with their horses. Takashi, they sleep during the days off more than usual. Don't you usually run in the morning just after sunrise? Yuma looked at Takashi and started shooting direct words. I didn't think you would know what I do all the time. I should watch myself if I don't want you to eat me. Takashi said with a sad smile. Eat you? Your bitter old meat would taste bad, you're not to my taste. Yuma replied with piercing eyes. Takashi was not angry. That's how this woman talks. Except for being a bit more polite to Krista, everyone in general is treated like this by her. In short, Takashi is relieved that he is not treated any differently. It's okay, no good fighting in the morning, gotta go straight on for the meat. Thomas said with a motivated smile. I'm not talking to you, monkey. Yuma said before turning around and starting the journey. This witch. Thomas muttered under his breath. Get used to it, maybe she can be your wife in the future. Takashi patted Thomas' shoulder and climbed on two barbers to begin the journey. Takashi, don't engage me with a witch like that. Thomas got on his horse and caught up with the others. How are you, Sasha? Takashi approached Sasha, handed his the bow and arrows as he struck up a conversation. Happy, I haven't hunted in a long time and I hope I can catch something big today. Sasha said with sparkling eyes. Of course we'll hunt something interesting, I'm motivated. Takashi smiled and said nothing more. There is only one bow. Sasha was motivated and Takashi offered her the bow to take over. Sasha, who was a hunter, had a guaranteed level, not much worse than her father. They all rode their horses, galloping all the way. After arriving at the site, they tied up their horses somewhere in the dense forest outside the station. The next step is to walk on foot. The road ahead is already too difficult to walk on horseback. It would be easy to scare off prey with a horse in this place. Sasha obviously has experience. As soon as I enter the forest, I carefully search for tracks left by various animals, occasionally finding the feces left by some animals not so long ago. However, soon Sasha realized the horror that was her teammates. Thomas accidentally scared a rabbit. When he found a beaver, Krista exclaimed, and then accordingly the beaver escaped. Beaver, damn humans, this old beaver escaped from their arrows. Did they really think it would be easy to take me into their stomach? Takashi couldn't take it anymore and grabbed some plants on the ground. This won't work if we continue this way. See this kind of wild plant in my hand. We can find some wild vegetables like lettuce, mushrooms and arugula. By having this, we can make some good dishes with the meat that Sasha catches. Several people were a little embarrassed. Thomas, Krista and the others didn't know how to hunt. On this trip they have been doing them a favor in accepting them. Sasha has a good temperament, but Takashi is not that kind of person. Thomas wanted to learn how to hunt, but it really wasn't something he could learn in a short time. It's okay, we'll find wild plants and Sasha will do the hunting on her own. Thomas replied quietly, a little guilty about the situation. Okay, we'll be in the vicinity, let's search and not get too far apart. With the directions given, Yama, Thomas and Krista walked towards the outskirts of the forest. Without the interference of third parties, Sasha walked into the forest and the process was too quiet. Some time later, Takashi was searching for edible mushrooms when he heard footsteps behind him. Sensing who it was, he asked, "Are you done foraging?" "We already have enough wild plants, just wait for Sasha to return." Yama looked at Takashi with a calm expression. "I didn't think you would trust me at first. I still doubt your true intentions in keeping that secret from you." Takashi finished picking the mushrooms and pointed out, "What assures me that your ability can't be useful in the future? Besides, there is a possibility that there are many more like us. You said your ability was very different. How different is it from normal titans?" Yama asked curiously. "I don't know how I obtained this power, but what I am aware of is that I will use it for the future of these walls and all its people. I'm not sure if it's the same in your case, but in every use I make of my ability, let's just say I get sick in a certain way." After saying that, Takashi remarked, "It's like it consumes me. I'm sure my ability is for a much higher purpose than what the Titans represent." Takashi started to play with the cards he had. He definitely didn't know how to explain his power otherwise. It wasn't related to the Titans after all, and once his Susanoo made a presence in this world, he didn't know what would happen next. A noble motive. Something fantastic, but the tricky thing will be for the humanity inside these walls to accept you. What will you do if they start hunting you as just another monster in this world? Yama looked at Takashi blankly. Nothing, I'm sure my power will serve in some way. If they decide not to accept me, I will do my best to bring about a change with my own abilities. Takashi said, I don't need to be accepted, I will build a world for the people I love, only that. Yama seemed surprised at Takashi's words. She smiled slightly and didn't say anything until some time later. If you can prove to me that you will win, I will tell you some things I know about my history. Takashi smiled and said, I'll be waiting for that moment. Go back with the others, I'll look for Sasha. Takashi and Yama parted ways and went in two different directions. After that conversation, he felt much more comfortable with Yama and knew that he was quite possibly no one with evil ideas. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, when Thomas and the others were a bit impatient, Sasha and Takashi returned with a huge boar tied to a long pole. Sasha was full of excitement, holding two large rabbits in her hands. Look, besides the boar that Takashi killed with his sword, I was able to catch these big rabbits. Thomas, that's great, I'm starving, I can finally eat meat again. Yama and Krista were sorting the freshly picked wild vegetables. Thomas felt a little regretful. Before he came, he thought he could help, but he only fooled his teammates. No wonder Takashi said he did nothing but collect wild plants. He picked a mushroom called Delicious Mushroom which he picked by chance. Sasha, Takashi, is it edible? Sasha took a closer look and nodded, yes, it tastes good. Takashi also thinks that today's harvest is fine, many core soldiers who stayed at the base could eat meat today. Rabbits can be made from mushrooms and wild vegetables. After Takashi and the others returned to the core training station, the group headed straight to the base kitchen. Takashi along with Thomas had been in charge of cleaning the boar, Krista and Sasha cleaned the rabbits. After everything was prepared, Takashi together with Sasha placed the boar on a spit that he made with the help of string and sticks. After hours of preparation, Takashi took charge of making the rabbits and completely took over the cooking. In the kitchen he found green peppers, potatoes, prepared 2 eggs, some onion, some ginger, plus the mushrooms and the mushroom that Thomas picked earlier. The ingredients are more or less complete to make something good. Yama and Sasha were rigorously tending the boar. Krista on her side was preparing the conical utensils. Poor Thomas was depressed waiting for dinner. To be honest, several people are curious about what Takashi is going to make, but he has also demonstrated good cooking skills before, so no one thinks he will waste ingredients. Wearing an apron, Takashi cut the rabbit into parts, marinated them for a while with some ingredients while making a mushroom soup, added various seasonings and then heated animal oil, sauteed peppers and then the meat was added until it was done. He then made mashed potatoes and along with the mushroom soup, served the rabbit meat in different dishes. Takashi experimented mostly in this dish with simple ideas from his head. He did not dare to use vegetables that spoil the flavors, after all he does not know very well how to accompany them. In the evening, 5 plates with the food Takashi prepared were placed in a corner of the dining room. The boar meat was being split into pieces suitable for all the cadets and some of the instructors who stayed at the base. Sasha on her side had already activated Berserker mode, not paying attention to her image at all, eating profusely. That's why she looks cute, but few people really pursue her and Takashi doesn't think much of romance. Takashi, it's so delicious. How did you put all these amazing flavors together? Sasha asked, covering her stomach in satisfaction. She had initially doubted Takashi's abilities, but he showed her that he wasn't bad at cooking. It's delicious, much better than what Yama has prepared before, Krista said admiringly. Yama rolled his eyes. Naturally he didn't know how to cook, and neither did Krista. Takashi was speechless. He didn't quite know what she did, but at least it came out well. He took care of the flavors, and at least in his previous world this meal was just a meat stew. If he knew different recipes, he could have made more interesting things. Although the method and steps may not be right, the taste is passable and everyone liked it. If you like it, I'll write you a recipe later. Please give it to me. Sasha has started fantasizing about good days in the future. Thomas patted Takashi on the shoulder. At first they didn't trust your cooking skills, but after tasting a lot of your dishes I faithfully support you. Remember to never let this gift you have go dormant. The fries you made the other day were very good in taste and texture. Someday I will show everyone my culinary skills. Takashi did not speak. This shameless man had no idea what he was talking about. Once, Thomas offered to cook alone, but his fried eggs were burnt. What's the smell? It's so fragrant. At this time, some people came over for dinner. Takashi saw Aaron, Armin, Mikasa and the others enter the dining room and greeted them directly to eat together. The boar meat had already been cut and dishes began to be served. Later, Nelson arrived after a hard day of training. Berthold and the others came in curiously. When Takashi looked at this, he shouted, "Come in everyone, the food this time is thanks to the hunting skills of Sasha and Yama together with Krista who prepared the food." Woo! Enthusiastic applause. In this way, there are more and more people, and the atmosphere is very lively. After a while, more than 20 people gathered who enjoyed the meat for the first time in a long time. Annie tasted the rabbit and was a little surprised. "I didn't expect you to be able to cook. I thought a guy like you only knew how to immerse yourself in training." Annie and Takashi are not very familiar. In her eyes she had only seen Takashi train non-stop. He took the initiative to talk. Takashi thought to himself and replied by saying, "Well, I have some skills. But, you don't seem to know how to cook. I'll teach you someday." Annie narrowed her eyes. Mina was right, talking to Takashi sometimes could make people angry. Takashi was quickly slapped in the face with a handkerchief. Soon after, Annie started to cut the meat that was served on her table for everyone. She who hadn't come in contact with people much, tonight she gained some friends. "Yeah, I thought he, like Aaron, couldn't do anything but train," Yama interrupted so rudely. Aaron, who was inexplicably affected at Yama's words, blushed a little, but just as he was about to protest the meat got stuck in his throat and he almost choked. Takashi looked at this protagonist who on many occasions almost abandoned the mortals. He should take care of him with more attention. Seeing that everyone had almost eaten, Takashi patted Thomas on the shoulder. "Thomas, your help was amazing today. I'm going back to practice. I'll let you clean up here as a token of my friendship." After speaking, he slipped away without giving Thomas a chance to respond. Thomas, me. Productive. Leaving Thomas staring at the table with messy glasses and plates. Chapter 28, Something New. The days after that Takashi used them to train a proper martial art and swing the sword back and forth, infusing chakra into the edge of the blade. The designated days off had come to an end. On the training field, the familiar instructor stood on the high platform. It didn't take long before Instructor Keith began to sprinkle nice words. "Your allotted days off have passed and many of you have weak muscles again, but rest assured that this time I will train you to death." All the soldiers in the camp were silent, will the mythical surprise in the rewards and punishments of the tests return? Instructor Keith suddenly smiled. Let me share with you some news that will make you very happy. The climbing training that lasted about half a year has ended and will not be conducted in the future ever again. Yes. Yes, that's great. It should have been over a long time ago. We finally don't have to worry about it. Takashi looked at the people with different thoughts. The climbing training was to take away people's little fear about heights or difficult situations that may happen with the three-dimensional maneuvering equipment. Now he may think differently, but Takashi understood everyone. No wonder they are so happy. This training was torture and something where many recruits got kicked out of the training corps. This cliff climbing training was becoming more and more dangerous and tense. The assigned instructor would climb on top of everyone and cut the support rope. Other times he would just shake the rope to throw the recruits off balance. Many think that he would do. They cut their support rope. Many others fell victim to this adrenaline-filled situation. Every time this kind of training was conducted, for everyone it is a kind of torture, especially for the unlucky ones who were directly evaluated by the instructor Keith. Takashi had heard that within a month of starting climbing training, some would scream for their life, others would cry while climbing with no chance of receiving help from instructors, and it was all real when he remembered what happened. Therefore, this emotion is normal for Takashi. Having thought about this, he had to start coming up with a plan for future training and how to act with his secret ability that could be loved or hated. There was plenty of time left, but he had to hurry. When the cheers from the crowd subsided, Instructor Keith continued without hesitation and pointed out, there is a very interesting future test and special confrontation training. The time of this training will be after the physical training every morning, 1.5 hours a day with a maximum duration of 2 hours. Consult this information on the announcement board. Fighting. Confrontation between people. What should we learn that for? Do you think it will have a special score? Everyone was a little confused. The score for hand-to-hand combat training was not to be included in the final evaluation, but everyone knew that it is very important. Even so, a special course would not be arranged for this year. The level of emphasis placed on this course also varies from person to person. According to the instructor's words, Takashi understood that there were special partners for the training, but you can also practice with other people, as long as you are not lazy, the instructor does not mind. The table of the couples had been announced, Takashi and the charismatic Jean, Kirstine, Eren and Reina, Mikasa and Krista, the short guy named Connie and Sasha, Annie and Amin, and so on. Today the day was sunny, calm wind, and the sun was clear. As soon as the physical training was over, the hand-to-hand combat training had begun. At a training ground on the hillside, Jean held a wooden dagger and said to Takashi, "Are you ready? I'm going to attack." Takashi made a fighting stance and said with a calm look, "Come on, come at me anytime." Jean wielded the wooden dagger and charged forward with agility. Takashi knew that to defend against a knife attack, it is most ideal to defend as fast as possible and counter-attack without much thought. Therefore, Takashi was waiting for the way Jean was about to attack him. Seeing how Jean was charging straight at him, Takashi leaned to the side at the last moment to avoid Jean's attack. He grabbed the wrist where Jean was holding the knife with one hand and pushed it away from his body. Seconds later he hit with a kick to throw Jean backwards. So fast. Jean from a moment to this looked at the bright sky in cough, cough, I'm too careless. Jean stood up with Takashi's help, feeling that he was too careless a moment ago, and would definitely take Takashi down this time. Jean prepared the offensive again, bent down a little, clenched the wooden dagger with both hands and charged straight at Takashi. Jin's speed this time was much faster, and the strength together with the grip of the weapon is stronger. Just now, she was afraid of hurting Takashi, so this time she was going to do her best to attack him. Takashi's position changed, and with a serious expression, he leaned his body forward as much as he could, and once the wooden dagger was entered straight to his stomach, he hit with his forearms the hands holding the knife and attacked Jin's head. Burst. Jin once again fell backwards with ease. Damn it, what's going on? Jin was a little confused. In fact, in the original story, Annie used delicate moves and used more technique to deal with Eren and his opponents. All those who rush to attack are weak with technique attacks and decisive moves. Takashi is actually very merciful. He didn't use all his strength to generate serious damage to Jin's body, as well as he didn't use his chakra, otherwise the results would have been more painful. I'll have to start attacking on specific points of the body. I must learn with Jin. Takashi thought to himself as he watched Jin get up from the ground once again. Let's go again. Jin was not convinced of his results. In the days that followed, the fantasy of Takashi crying and giving up made Jin suspicious of life. Takashi was improving more and more his attacks and movements. Day by day he was increasing the intensity of the attacks with Jin. Not again. Putting Jin down again, Takashi said to Jin, who was now very depressed that he had not achieved anything good in these last days, if you want to learn, I can teach you. Jin scoffed, this one doesn't add up to points, no matter how well you learn, so it won't help me to become a military police officer. Takashi ignored Jin's words and said with a playful expression, you really don't want to learn? Jin hesitated a little and was honest with Takashi, Well, please teach me some tricks. He thought that after becoming a military policeman, the situation may also arise where he must fight criminals. Therefore, it is still necessary to learn some martial arts. Some instructors were teaching soldiers different ways of attacking and defending, but it is impossible to teach them all day after day. During the next few days, Takashi and Jin learned some simple grappling and fighting. After learning something, Jin was eager to find someone else to fight. Not to mention that maybe many people are superficial in this training, maybe because they are not very interested or because they did not find an instructor who taught them well. Some of the partners were extremely tough, like Mikasa, who very few dared to challenge. In the last confrontation with Takashi, Jin received a heavy blow. Her waist felt like he was about to snap in two, and he fell to the ground on her side again, unable to get up for a while. Indeed, you are the only one who can beat me, Jin said with a shocked face. As for what it was like to train with Takashi, Jin said that it was smooth. Seeing this, Takashi shook his head and didn't dare to think that he could beat everyone without making direct use of his chakra. Although Jin always lost to Takashi, he was not beaten so hard only until the end. But Jin learned diligently with Takashi and went cheerfully to challenge others from time to time, winning some clashes and losing definitely less. It turns out that fighting is great, shouted Jin excitedly. Thus a month and a half passed. In the melee class on this day, Takashi was sitting under a tree watching everyone training rigorously. He had challenged many people and also taught many of the cadets different ways of fighting. He looked around and found that there were actually all kinds of gods in the fighting class. Marco and his teammates practiced seriously, and Jin ran to challenge the others again. Krista seriously attacked Mikasa with a wooden dagger, but Mikasa easily dodged it. Connie raised a snake hand and attacked Sasha with bright eyes. Takashi would be ashamed to say he was Sasha's partner. He then focused his attention on the glowing Eren Giga's burst. Takashi watched Eren throw Reina, who fell to the ground. For some reason, he felt that Reina was going easy on Eren. Takashi had to say that if Reina was pretending to be weak, his level of acting was exceptional. He was doing quite well, but Takashi couldn't understand why he was holding back so much. What is Reina hiding? Of course, Reina might be hiding her true abilities, but she couldn't be compared to Annie from afar, who didn't hide her incredible fighting skills. At that moment, Annie walked past Reina and was about to leave when she was stopped by Reina. She then urged Eren to engage her. The proceedings were neither flashy nor brilliant. Eren was easily taken down by Annie. Annie had good martial arts skills and Eren was no serious match for her. Then, Reina, who was smiling at the result, was hit in the same way. It's not like I threw you for using my strength. Sometimes weak people have to resort to defense techniques against stronger ones. Annie said as she threw the gun in his hand. It won't hurt you to know these kinds of moves. Annie let go of Eren and combed her bangs. For someone with the same aspirations as Takashi, your skills don't do justice to the dreams you have. What good will combat techniques against titans do me? Eren said with a frustrated expression. Do you still want to learn fighting techniques? Asked Annie with a cold stare. Really? Maybe we could learn our fighting techniques and get to know each other better. Takashi slowly approached Annie. In the anime, Annie demonstrated excellent fighting techniques. After her secret observation for 10 days, Takashi determined that she was a worthy opponent for a fight. Without making use of his chakra in a fight, he wasn't sure he could win. It's time to take on someone worthy to fight. Her skills are good to see how far I currently stand. Takashi thought to himself. Chapter 29, Two Different Styles. Takashi walked slowly towards Annie and stopped not far away. Annie looked at him and suddenly smiled. I thought you wouldn't challenge me. Smiling and waving his hand, Takashi said without delay, I was thinking about it and you seem to have misunderstood my reasons. Although you are beautiful, it doesn't mean I can't beat you in a battle without damaging your pretty face. Ha ha. Apparently amused by Takashi's strange comments, Annie rarely showed a smile. There are sayings that you can't know a woman very well until she becomes your wife. Annie's expression turned cold right after she laughed, looking at Takashi without any expression. Takashi also became serious and signaled Annie, come and fight. The atmosphere suddenly cooled down a bit. Eren and Reina on the side looked at each other, and at the same time stepped back to make room for the two of them, and then stared at the two of them. Annie and Takashi made fighting gestures at the same time, and did not act rashly out of caution. Takashi narrowed his eyes and looked at Annie's fighting stance with her arms clenched and fists raised in front of her chest. He also knew about some martial arts in his previous life. What Annie uses seems to be Muay Thai, which is one of the most dangerous martial arts in the world. I honestly didn't know if Muay Thai existed in this world, but Annie's stance and way of attacking are characteristic only of that martial art. At this moment, many people looked sideways and others stared directly. Takashi on the other hand showed a standard boxing stance. After all, this martial art was the fruit of his nights of training for a long time. Even if Annie is not very strong, her fighting style was very eye-catching all over the place because of the way she defeated stronger opponents. And when Annie easily dealt with Eren and Reina at this time, she attracted a lot of attention from the surroundings. Takashi and Annie ignored the people around them. In an instant, the two moved at the same time, running towards each other. Annie swept a low blow with her long leg towards Takashi's ankles. When she saw this, Takashi also responded with the same blow immediately. Burst. The impact came and the two collided their legs. Takashi raised his eyebrows. The girl, who looked very thin, was explosive in strength. Her punches could be a bit faster. The two sides retracted their legs almost at the same time. Takashi clenched his fists, and after starting to use footwork, his right hand stretched like a whip towards Annie's face. The method and movements of boxing touch are extremely strong, generating a fierce punching style and sometimes mixed with a series of lethal combinations. Takashi knew Muay Thai has incredible kicks, probably the best knees and elbows in the game, and some decent punches as well. His body stiffening techniques are incredible and they have a pretty good clinch game. But if this technique could have weaknesses, well, her footwork is something that makes it very difficult for her to move. She lacks a lot of lateral movements, so you could say that rough boxing could be one of her weaknesses if you are careful. Annie put her hands upright in front of her chest to defend herself and block Takashi's direct attack. After taking the blow, Takashi landed another series of fast and hard combinations. Annie had no chance to counter Takashi's continuous blows, so she merely dodged while backing away. Takashi was surprised. Even if her punches were not at full strength, they were effective in suppressing Annie's attacks. After a stalemate for a moment, when Takashi's stormy attack stopped for a moment, Annie precisely grabbed Takashi's left arm with her left hand, passed her right arm under Takashi's left armpit and pushed her hand under Takashi's chin with a strong grip. At the same time, she lashed out with her right leg behind Takashi's leg. Takashi tilted his head and fell backward uncontrollably. At that moment, Takashi used all his strength to pull his hand out of Annie's grip and his hand wrapped around the slender waist, dropping them both to the ground. Something nice. Takashi, who lost his balance, fell backwards to the ground, rolled over and got up again. Annie, who was thrown off by Takashi's brute force, rolled away from Takashi the impact and quickly got to her feet. The four eyes met, and the eyes confirmed, doubting for a moment which of the two was losing. They both looked at each other indifferently and didn't speak, and again gestured to face each other. That's amazing. Eren swallowed saliva and was a little surprised. He hadn't seen much of the fight at this point. Reina didn't speak, just stared at the two of them. His frowning eyes watched Takashi's performance with unfamiliar thoughts. There were more and more people around: Mikasa, Yama, Sasha, Marco, Jean, Krista, Connie and the others all gathered at some point, but they didn't say a single word. Takashi looked at Annie on the opposite side. At first glance the match seemed evenly matched, but he actually had the upper hand in this fight. He knew that Annie's fighting style doesn't have many combinations, and although her punches can be fast, they lack different combinations. After Annie took him down, his grappling and dropping strength were not enough to keep him pinned. It can be said that he was careless a moment ago and did not use his footwork to dodge Annie's headlock. Suddenly, Annie took the initiative to attack Takashi and waved a somewhat delicate but powerful fist. Annie's flexible and quick fists hit him like raindrops, and Takashi was a little tired to keep defending the blows. Annie's fists were not too powerful, at least according to her current physical state, but they were too sharp and fast. No space could be found between them unless she ignored the physical damage and countered it with a combination of effective blows. Annie, who had the upper hand, suddenly changed her movement and a sharp elbow struck Takashi's chest with her right hand. Takashi's pupils shrank, his arms quickly crossed to block the blow. There was nothing magical about it, just a defensive posture. At this moment, the corner of Annie's mouth was slightly twisted, with a quick twist left leg attacked from behind Takashi's legs and her left hand pushed her elbow to attack. All these moves were done in an instant, and it could be said that the elbow that suddenly changed the movement was ready to impact Takashi's body. Annie expected that Takashi would have to adjust his body to block the elbow from his right hand. However, Takashi quickly backed away, yet after drawing a distance from Annie, a high-speed swift kick was directed at his head. Takashi's heart clenched and he realized that he had been tricked, but it was too late. He concentrated and tried to defend his chest so much that he completely ignored a superior attack. Annie's right ankle kick hit Takashi's head. Due to the slight imbalance and that Annie had made an unforeseen turn, he couldn't dodge it. Takashi fell to the ground and rolled once before getting slightly embarrassed. The audience suddenly exclaimed quietly. In fact, not many people could see why that happened at this moment, but Instructor Keith, who was secretly watching not far away, still understood. Keith is very clear that as long as it's not a crushing situation, fighting is always a battle of wits and bravery, and Annie's feinted elbow is specially designed to cheat Takashi's speed. Takashi looked at Annie blankly. In terms of skills, he completely lost a moment ago. This woman started practicing from the womb. He felt he had underestimated her, not only Muay Thai, but also some kind of jiu-jitsu. This girl is amazing. He didn't know that Annie had been practicing martial arts since she was a child, and she was quite talented. When he was very young, Takashi remembers playing hide-and-seek with her father. After all, Takashi has only been practicing boxing for at least half a year and there was no opportunity for real combat. If he doesn't cheat now by making use of his chakra, he really couldn't win. Takashi and Annie faced each other again, and a large group of people watched intently at all the clever combinations of attacks the two performed. "Hey, Takashi, are you okay?" Yama shouted with a venomous tongue. Takashi was in no mood to answer that which. Annie looked at Takashi and showed an inexplicable smile. "Takashi, can't you fight me with all your might? Why do you despise a weak woman like me?" Some of Takashi's scalps were numb. This was the first time he felt that a woman's intuition was terrifying. Takashi's expression didn't change. "My fault, I won't keep my hands reserved in the future. I hope you won't cry when the time comes." "Is that so?" After expressing her thoughts, Annie regained her icy face, showing neither joy nor anger. Taking a deep breath, Takashi dismissed all distracting thoughts and concentrated on what he was about to do. He adopted a standard boxing sparring stance. Chakra concentrated on his fists and legs, ready to make only one attacking combination. Suddenly, Takashi charged towards Annie. With speed he slid across the ground, fists clenched. His movements were crisp and his chakra penetrated through different parts of his body: elbows, fists, hips, knees and feet. By the time the increased force is exerted throughout her body, she is as strong as a bull. The momentum moves with the chakra and the speed is as fast as lightning. Annie was constantly defending, retreating and dodging as she prepared to attack. She was steady and aggressive with some attacks, and occasionally kicked a couple of times to try to disrupt Takashi's rhythm. But this time Takashi gave her no chance. Her feet planted on the ground and now that she had closed the distance she didn't plan to move. Then suddenly a kick broke Annie's rhythm. This time, Takashi's strength was enough to open her defense and she used a combination of light punches and unleashed a powerful punch straight to her stomach. However, Takashi retracted his punch and with a backward leap he lassoed a swift kick with his right leg. Burst. A dull physical crash sounded. Annie was hit by a kick and went flying. With a thud, she fell to the ground a little ways away and rolled several times before coming to a stop. The audience was silent, unlike Annie, who knocked Takashi down with her subtle movements and calculations. Takashi's attacks were fast and fierce. One could say that his attacks were not as flashy as Annie's. After all, this is a fast boxing technique, but this time Takashi completely ignored the defense and changed the move by attacking with a kick. Of course, Takashi did not hold a grudge against Annie, otherwise her attack would have been more serious. Takashi made sure not to hit in a serious area where it could generate a fracture or painful aftermath. He only struck suddenly and slowed the force, changing it to a thrusting force. Chapter 30, Who will win this fight? That fucker, I'm going to kill him with my bare hands. Berthold muttered in a crazed voice as he watched her attack Annie. Calm down, Berthold. Raina held Berthold's arm tightly and pointed. This time, you'll get your chance later, but you don't want to be seen with that expression on your face, so calm down. I'm so sorry, I have to get out of here, Berthold said with a sad expression. He looked confused, his gaze was fixed on Takashi the whole time. Don't do anything stupid, Raina said in a low voice. Yama looked towards Berthold and said, What, is it so hard for him to see his love being brought down like that? Raina flashed a nervous smile and said, He feels bad. He has always been very respectful to women and it angers him that a man would fight so aggressively with a woman. Well, next time he can fight him instead of Annie. What an idiotic thing to be angry about. Yama ignored Raina and looked at Takashi with a smile. Cough. Cough. Annie coughed a couple of times, lay on the ground for a while and then slowly got up. Takashi was not completely lacking in emotional intelligence, so he stepped forward to help her up. At this moment, both of their training uniforms were dusty. Where did you learn this unreasonable boxing technique? Was that your real strength? Annie could feel that this set of movements belonged to a system and was quite irritable. The collision at this moment almost made her turn away, and she secretly scolded Takashi for being a reckless man who didn't know how to love women, but at the same time she was a little curious. Takashi smiled and said a few words superficially, That was all my strength. The fighting technique is one that combines very fast footwork and lethal combinations. From what I saw, your fighting style has disadvantage in that aspect. Do I have to tell her that I was watching her for a while? Annie was surprised. Very convenient. The speed and combinations you were doing, I couldn't stop them without taking direct hits. Takashi was stunned for a moment. He knew that the boxing was very fast and his combinations could become some of the most effective against Muay Thai masters. Yeah, I can't say I could beat you if I didn't use all my strength. You are someone with incredible fighting skills, Takashi said with a smile. Annie lowered her head and suddenly felt somewhat out of place. Why did she suddenly point out that she couldn't stop Takashi's combinations? She felt weird and at the same time different. When he looked at the dust on Annie's body and some messy hair, Takashi couldn't help but feel a little guilty. He reached out and smoothed Annie's messy blonde hair, which was a bit of an intimate move. Annie was surprised for a moment and took a little while to react. She patted Takashi's hand and took a step back. Her expression could be defined as unnatural. Takashi was speechless. He really didn't think much of it at the moment, but then he felt it was a bit bold and regretted it. It seemed he had misunderstood. There was an explosion of boos from the audience, and Berthold's face was even paler in the distance. He slowly returned to normal after seeing Annie take Takashi's hand away. With a teasing expression on her face, Yama said directly, See, that's the result of trying to flirt after hitting a woman. Right, Sasha. Ha. Sasha was surprised when Yuma mentioned her name. Are you just going to stand there when your man is being taken away from you? Yuma put her arm around Sasha's neck. I don't know what you're talking about, Takashi and I are just friends. Sasha said with a nervous smile. Really? You have to be smart, many others might get their claws on what can be yours in the future. Yuma let go of Sasha and patted her shoulder. Sasha felt uncomfortable with Yuma's words, she was only looking at Takashi as a friend. Hearing Yuma's sharp comments, Takashi didn't know how to respond, but fortunately, Instructor Keith helped him when he approached the scene. Clap 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 clap. Don't misunderstand the scene, these are just claps. A burst of applause suddenly sounded from behind, and everyone looked back in bewilderment, only to find that Instructor Keith and several combat class instructors slowly approached. Instructor Keith nodded his head to Takashi and Annie, then looked at everyone. Did you look at it? People who were lazy in melee training made such an impressive display, aren't you ashamed? Melee training doesn't add up to points, but so many of you trained so hard. In the end, all that time is not a waste for you. Now I ask you, for those of you who didn't take these classes seriously, can you do anything against people with those fighting skills? You must remember that these are not just titans you must face in the future, and you will not always have a weapon in your hands. Remember, practice rigorously and don't be lazy in the future. Instructor Keith paused, pointed at Takashi and Annie and said, if you have this level of combat, from now on I can pretend I don't see their laziness. Of course he knew Takashi and Annie were being lazy in training, but he didn't care because they didn't need to. He knew they had certain skills to take this training lightly. No matter how good the capes could be at hiding, nothing could escape under her hair. Instructor Keith continued as he looked at the crowd with a serious expression, we have taught you the basics of martial arts. Watch your fists, your elbows must be close to your chest. The instructors will teach you basic moves and nifty skills, ask for tips and practice harder. And as a result, you won't be beaten by thieves once you become a military policeman. Instructor Keith left after speaking and many people bowed their heads. It is true that many people in this class are slacking off, and at least almost half of them have not trained seriously during all this time. After that, the class became a little livelier. Eren and Amin switched to their opponents. Eren started asking Annie for advice. Of course, he also invited Takashi from time to time. Although he learned alone, Takashi showed no mercy and almost taught him everything he knew. Then, Eren's partner, Reina, faced again and was surprised to find out that he gradually couldn't beat Eren. One day at the training camp, Eren grabbed the wooden knife and stabbed straight at Annie at full speed, but Annie dodged with flexibility. Burst. Eren tripped over Annie's foot and fell to the ground. Cough. Annie, your punches are still fierce. Eren got up from the ground slowly. You're showing no mercy in your attacks, you're always rushing with all your might to hurt me, shouldn't you be nice to girls? Annie's expression was slightly weak. Eren disagreed, I think Takashi is right. You shouldn't be merciful just because your opponent is a woman. Do your best to respect your opponent. Annie's expression was a bit helpless. Don't listen to his fallacies and heresies. Did you learn this from him? Takashi's boxing method is too difficult. I don't understand it very well, so I have to ask his advice all the time. You mean mine is easier to learn? Annie asked with a cold expression. Hearing no answer, she remarked, really? Then you should study hard. Annie lunged at Eren and smashed her left fist into Eren's face. Aaron's expression changed and he raised his hand to block. Annie suddenly changed her movements and bent down. She lowered her head, slipped her left arm under Aaron's left arm, and used her other arm to hold Aaron's neck tightly. Then he threw him to the ground with all his might. By the way, I meant to tell you yesterday, learn to talk properly to women. Aaron fell to the ground firmly and his face was reddened from being strangled hard. I want to learn this trick too, teach me how to do it. At some point, Mikasa approached with a murderous look on her face. Annie let go of Aaron and turned her head to look at Mikasa. They looked at each other and their eyes were a bit cold. Both of them are one of the best female soldiers in the whole class. In fact, they had noticed each other before, but they didn't communicate much. Annie looked at the expressionless Mikasa. Forget it, you don't look like you need to learn this, these moves are only useful for weak people. Mikasa didn't speak, just looked at Annie blankly. Aaron has been learning martial arts from Annie recently, and has gotten a bit closer to her because of the demonstration fight she did with Takashi. Although Aaron often learns from Takashi, that nasty boy is a man, and Anne is different. She is not only powerful, but also a beautiful woman. So now she was very upset. Annie adopted a fighting stance, but I'm also curious if this will work on the beasts. Mikasa was unmoved and looked at Annie coldly. Obviously, now there was about to be a fight of beauties, of female soldiers. Aaron stood up, looked at Mikasa and Annie and muttered to himself, are they going to face each other? With a strong desire to survive, he unconsciously took 2 steps back, then felt that he had bumped into someone. He turned his head to look and discovered that a crowd of people watching the fun had gathered from some time ago. Reina looked at Mikasa and Annie who were facing each other. Who do you think will win, Aaron? The last time he went to challenge Mikasa, he was beaten badly. Unfortunately, he was also defeated by Annie in turn. He tried his best both times, but the results were less than ideal. Annie, Marco said. Marco's best friend Jean jumped up excitedly and said, Mikasa, it must be Mikasa, I can bet my dinner tonight. Connie reached out and nudged Takashi, who was standing next to her. Who do you think will win? Takashi had fought Annie and beaten her, but these results were not entirely clear to the audience. Takashi pretended to be very calm and said, Annie has technique, fighting experience and battle perception. However, Mikasa is strong, fast and overall is much stronger than Annie. If I'm honest, I don't know, any result would generate controversy to this question. In the anime and manga, this fight never happened. The author of the same work is said to have pointed out that the battle was stopped by an instructor shortly before it was to happen, so Takashi wasn't quite sure what was about to happen. He looked at his empty hands and felt a little regretful. It would be nice to have something to eat. Ignoring everyone's discussion, Mikasa slowly walked towards Annie. If she can beat Annie, she will do it with all her abilities. Her strength won't be able to hold back like Takashi did. That's it guys, hope you like the video. Like, share and subscribe the channel. Make sure you comment below what kind of stories you want to see next and any recommendation you have.